In most neighborhoods, a service dog walking peacefully by his owner's side would be a symbol of loyalty and quiet dignity. But in Jacob's new community, it became the spark for a war that no one saw coming. Jacob, a resilient young man in his early 30s, had built his life around the steady companionship of Max, his golden retriever service dog trained to assist him after a devastating accident. To Jacob, Max wasn't just a pet. He was independence, safety, and family. But to Karen, the self-proclaimed enforcer of the HOA, Max was a violation of her picture-perfect street. Karen had a reputation for turning trivial matters into neighborhood dramas. She lived for HOA meetings, thrived on enforcing obscure rules, and demanded unquestioned obedience. When she saw Max's bright service dog harness, she didn't see the law. She saw a target. What began as glares and passive-aggressive flyers soon escalated into an act so shocking, neighbors would never forget it: Karen spraying Jacob's service dog in the middle of the street. What Karen didn't realize was that this single reckless act would unleash a storm far greater than she had ever controlled. Jacob's life had never been simple, but after his accident he learned to measure peace in small victories. A morning stroll with Max, his golden retriever service dog, was one of those victories. Max wasn't just a companion, he was a bridge to independence. With his black harness secured snugly across his back, the bright patch reading service dog in bold letters, Max guided Jacob confidently down the sidewalks of their suburban neighborhood. The air was crisp. Sunlight stretched across the neat rows of lawns, and birds sang from trimmed hedges. To Jacob, it was the picture of normalcy he had craved since moving in. But in the shadows of that normalcy lurked Karen. Karen wasn't officially on the HOA board, but everyone knew she pulled the strings. Her reputation for nitpicking rules was legendary. She once fined a neighbor for leaving a garden gnome too close to the walkway, and she once wrote a 6-page complaint about mismatched mailbox paint. For her, enforcing the HOA's standards wasn't just a duty, it was her identity. And from the moment she saw Max, she had decided he didn't belong. Jacob had noticed her stares before. At first, he dismissed them. People often misunderstood service animals. But Karen was different. She wasn't curious. She was hostile. Each time Max trotted faithfully at Jacob's side, Karen's eyes narrowed like a predator sizing up its prey. The first confrontation was subtle. Karen had waved a flyer in Jacob's direction, her tone clipped. HOA policy states no animals left outside unattended. That includes that dog. Jacob had kept his composure. He's not unattended and he's not a pet. He's a service animal. Karen's lips had tightened, but she walked away. For most people, that would have been the end. For Karen, it was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Jacob found notices stuffed in his mailbox. Complaints about noise when Max barked once at a delivery man. Notes about mess when Max's leash brushed against a flower bed. Every word was steeped in disdain. Jacob wasn't confrontational by nature, but he wasn't weak either. He had fought through pain, surgeries, and months of rehab to stand on his own 2 feet again. He wasn't about to be intimidated by a neighbor with a clipboard and too much free time. Still, the tension grew, until one fateful afternoon shattered all restraint. Jacob had been walking Max near Karen's yard, the late sun painting long shadows across the pavement. Karen suddenly emerged from her driveway, a small plastic spray bottle gripped in her hand. Her face was set in stone, her eyes blazing with unhinged determination. "Your mutt doesn't belong here!" she screamed. And before Jacob could react, she raised the bottle and pressed the trigger. A fine mist shot forward, drifting straight into Max's face. The golden retriever yelped, shaking his head as his ears flattened back. Jacob's heart dropped. He lunged forward, crouching beside Max, his arms wrapping around the dog in a protective shield. Fury blazed in his eyes as he turned toward Karen, who stood smugly, the bottle still clutched in her fist. Neighbors froze in the background. A man on his porch dropped his coffee. A woman by her mailbox gasped audibly, and even children peeking through a screen door went silent. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. Jacob's jaw tightened as he steadied Max, whispering softly to calm him. But inside, a storm was brewing. Karen hadn't just crossed a line. She had broken a federal law, one she had no idea would come crashing down on her very soon. The moment Karen sprayed Max, Jacob's world shifted. He wasn't just angry. He was electrified with a protective fury that every neighbor could feel radiating off him. His first thought was Max's safety. He wiped at the retriever's fur with his sleeve, checking his eyes, whispering softly, "Easy, boy. I got you." Max's tail twitched nervously, but the dog leaned into Jacob's touch, steady as always. Karen, however, didn't back down. She stood tall, almost triumphant, the bottle dangling casually now as though she had proven a point. "HOA rules are rules," she snapped, her voice loud enough to echo down the street. "No pets, no exceptions. I'm sick of you parading that mutt like he's special." Jacob rose to his full height, squaring his shoulders. Though he wasn't the tallest man on the block, his presence filled the space. "He's not a pet," Jacob said evenly, his voice edged with steel. "He's a service animal." "What you just did is illegal," Karen smirked. "Oh, please. Don't throw your fake laws at me. This is our community, and I enforce the standards here. Nobody wants your dog around." That line hit the neighbors harder than it hit Jacob. Murmurs rippled across porches. A man shook his head, muttering, "That's not right." A mother pulled her child back inside. It was subtle, but Jacob saw the tide shifting. People were no longer staring at him. They were staring at Karen. Still, Karen basked in the attention. She raised her chin and pointed her spray bottle toward Max again, though she didn't press it this time. "I'll have you fined. I'll have you evicted. You'll regret moving here." Jacob's eyes narrowed. He knew now this wasn't just personal spite. This was harassment backed by Karen's false claim of power. And he wasn't about to cower. "Try me," he said firmly, his voice carrying like thunder across the street. "I know the law better than you ever will. What you just did is assault against a service animal, punishable under federal law." The words landed like a stone in still water. Karen faltered just for a moment, her smugness dimming, but pride kept her from backing down. "We'll see what the HOA says," she snapped before retreating toward her yard, muttering insults under her breath. As she stormed off, Jacob's neighbors broke their silence. An older man with gray hair spoke first. "She's gone too far this time," another nodded. "That poor dog. Somebody's got to stop her." Jacob looked down at Max, who nuzzled his leg as if to remind him. They were in this together. Jacob knew he couldn't let Karen's cruelty slide. For Max's sake, and for every neighbor too scared to stand up to her, he had to act. That night, Jacob sat at his desk, his laptop glowing in the dim light. He pulled up the federal statutes protecting service animals, reading each line carefully. Penalties included heavy fines, even jail time, for anyone interfering with a service animal's work. He documented everything, the flyers, the mailbox notes, and now the spray attack. He wasn't just preparing a complaint. He was building a case. Karen thought she had won a battle. But Jacob was preparing for a war she could never win. The next morning, Jacob woke to the sound of voices outside his ranch-style home. Peering through the blinds, he saw Karen already on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 HOA board members. They were younger than her, probably mid-40s, but their uneasy expressions betrayed hesitation. Karen, however, was energized. She waved her clipboard like a battle flag. "This is an emergency HOA inspection," she declared loudly, ensuring half the street could hear. "This homeowner is in violation of our pet policy, and his animal is a nuisance to this community." Jacob's jaw tightened. He opened the door calmly, Max padding faithfully at his side. The dog wore his bright blue service vest, its embroidered words, "Service Animal, Do Not Distract," gleaming under the sun. "Morning," Jacob said evenly, his voice steady but carrying weight. "Care to explain why you're trespassing on my property?" Karen didn't miss a beat. "We're here under HOA authority. You're being cited for unauthorized pet ownership, unsightly yard violations," she gestured at a patch of uncut grass near his mailbox, "and creating a hostile environment." One of the board members, a balding man with glasses, shifted uncomfortably. "Karen, maybe we should—" She cut him off. Quiet, Dennis. This is official business. Turning back to Jacob, she smirked. I'll be filing for eviction if you don't comply. Consider this your final warning. Jacob's anger simmered, but he refused to lose control. Instead, he took out his phone and began recording. He held it steady, making sure everyone was in frame. Karen, her clipboard, the board members, and Max calmly sitting at his feet. Karen, he said, his tone sharp and deliberate, you have no authority to evict anyone. And this, he motioned toward Max, is not a pet. He is a federally protected service animal. What you did yesterday, spraying him, is a federal offense. You're not just breaking HOA bylaws. You're breaking the law. The camera caught Karen's smirk faltering. She laughed, but it came out brittle. You think recording me will save you? I run this HOA. No, Jacob said firmly, stepping closer, his voice now low and thunderous. You don't run anything. HOA policies don't override federal law, and I have every word you've said on video. The other board member, a woman in a navy blazer, finally spoke. Karen, he's right. Service dogs are protected. We can't enforce a ban. Karen turned on her with a glare sharp enough to cut glass. Whose side are you on, Monica? But Monica's hesitation was answer enough. The balance of power was shifting, and Karen felt it. Her grip on control was slipping in front of the very neighbors she relied on for authority. Jacob, meanwhile, calmly posted the video online that night. He uploaded it to a neighborhood forum and even sent a copy to his lawyer. Within hours, it spread. Neighbors sharing, commenting, whispering. The HOA's so-called inspection had become public evidence of Karen's abuse of power. And Jacob knew he had just fired the first shot in a battle Karen never expected to lose. The following week, the HOA called for an emergency meeting at the community hall. Word had spread quickly after Jacob's video went viral online, and the place was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, neighbors whispered in clusters, and a low hum of tension filled the air. Karen sat at the head of the long table, her floral blouse freshly ironed, her clipboard stacked with papers like a judge ready to deliver sentencing. She tried to project authority, but the restless crowd and the sideways glances of her own board members made her fidget. Jacob entered quietly, Max trotting faithfully at his side. The golden retriever's vest gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and several neighbors reached down to pat his head before Jacob took a seat near the front. Karen cleared her throat loudly. This meeting is called to address repeated violations by one homeowner. Jacob stood before she could finish, his voice steady but sharp. Before you begin, I'd like to remind everyone that what Karen is doing is not only unethical but illegal. Gasps rippled through the room. A neighbor in the back muttered, "He's the guy with the service dog, right?" Another whispered, "I saw that video. She sprayed his dog." Karen slammed her clipboard down. "Silence! This is my meeting. I decide the rules." But the atmosphere had shifted. The board members exchanged uneasy looks, and Dennis, the balding man with glasses, finally spoke up. "Karen, I think the community deserves to hear him out." She shot him a glare that could set fire to stone. "You're siding with him now?" "No," Jacob interrupted, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "He's siding with the law. Karen, you can't evict me, and you can't harass a service animal. The Americans with Disabilities Act makes what you did a federal crime." Several neighbors nodded, some even clapping softly. Monica, the woman in the navy blazer, stood and addressed the crowd. "We all saw the video. We can't deny it happened. This isn't about rules anymore. This is about abuse of power." Karen's face flushed crimson. She stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "Abuse of power? I've given my life to this community. Without me, this place would fall apart. You think he's some kind of hero because of a dog? He's manipulating you!" Jacob held up his phone again, this time playing the recording of Karen declaring she would file for his eviction. The room went silent as her words echoed against the walls. "This is official business. I'll be filing for eviction." Gasps, disbelief. Even Karen's closest allies looked shaken. One elderly neighbor stood from the back. "Karen, enough is enough. We joined this HOA to keep our neighborhood safe, not to bully people. Spraying a service dog? That's unforgivable." The crowd erupted. Some demanded her resignation. Others shouted for accountability. Karen's voice was drowned out as she tried to shout over them. Her once loyal following was slipping through her fingers, replaced by outrage and whispers of lawsuits. Jacob, meanwhile, simply stood tall, Max calm at his side. He didn't have to fight anymore. The truth was fighting for him, and for the first time, Karen realized she was no longer feared. She was exposed. Karen stormed out of the community hall after being shouted down, but Jacob knew she wasn't finished. The very next morning, he woke to find a bright orange notice taped to his gate. In bold black letters, it read, "Final warning, non-compliance will result in property seizure." Jacob shook his head, peeling it from the wood. She just doesn't quit, does she, Max? The golden retriever wagged his tail, unaware of the storm brewing. Later that day, Karen marched up the gravel road toward Jacob's ranch with two men trailing behind her, both wearing cheap suits and holding clipboards. She was still clutching her own battered clipboard like it was a sword. "Jacob!" she called, her voice shrill, echoing across the open land. "You've left me no choice. These men are here to begin proceedings to seize your property for repeated violations." Jacob stepped out from his porch, his stance calm but firm. "Those men aren't federal marshals, Karen. They're not even county officers. They're just debt collectors you hired." Karen froze, her confidence faltering for a split second before she barked, "They're authorized by the board." One of the suited men shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, actually, we were just told to come here for paperwork. We don't have authority to seize anything." Neighbors had already begun gathering at the end of the road, drawn by the raised voices. Some whispered, others filmed the scene with their phones. Karen's facade of authority was cracking wider with each second. Jacob folded his arms. "Karen, every notice you've posted on my gate, every threat you've made, every word you've shouted at community meetings, I've documented all of it, and now you've dragged strangers onto my property to intimidate me. This isn't leadership. It's harassment," Karen's voice wavered. "You can't speak to me that way. I run this neighborhood." "No," Jacob cut in, his voice steady, amplified by the murmurs of the watching crowd. "You don't run anything anymore. You abused your position, and everyone here knows it. And just so you're clear, Karen, I've already contacted federal authorities. What you did to Max isn't just harassment, it's a federal offense." At the mention of federal offense, a hush fell over the crowd. People exchanged wide-eyed looks. The dog, calm but alert, sat at Jacob's feet, a living reminder of the line Karen had crossed. Karen's face twisted in panic. She tried to rally, pointing at Jacob like a villain in a courtroom drama. "He's lying! He's twisting this against me! You all know I've kept this community in order." But no one spoke in her defense. Phones kept recording, neighbors shook their heads, and the two men she brought quietly walked away, leaving her standing alone in the dirt. Jacob bent down and scratched Max behind the ears. "She wanted to seize my home, boy, but all she's lost is her credibility." And for the first time, Karen realized the walls she had built around herself had collapsed, not from outside attacks, but from her own reckless obsession with control. Karen didn't sleep that night. Her once proud living room, once a command center for her HOA reign, now felt like a prison. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Angry texts from board members, screenshots of neighbors posting about her on social media, videos of yesterday's confrontation going viral across the community. She had become the villain in her own neighborhood. Meanwhile, Jacob sat at his kitchen table with Max resting at his feet, speaking calmly into the phone. "Yes, Officer Hayes, I'll forward you all the recordings and notices. I've also saved screenshots of every HOA message Karen has sent since I moved in. I want to press charges for harassment, trespassing, and, of course, the service dog incident." Hayes, the county officer, replied, "Good. That last one's serious. Interfering with a service dog is a federal crime. She'll have to answer for that." The next morning, two sheriff's cruisers rolled down the street. Neighbors peeked from windows and porches as deputies walked straight to Karen's door. She opened it with forced confidence, already rehearsing her excuses. "Officers, finally! I was just about to file complaints against—" "Ma'am," one deputy interrupted firmly. "We need you to come with us." Karen blinked rapidly. "Excuse me? This is a mistake. I run this community!" The deputy didn't flinch. "You don't run the law. You've been reported for multiple violations, and we have evidence. Interfering with a service animal is a federal offense. You'll need to answer for it in court. Gasps echoed down the street as the neighbors gathered again. Phones were out, recording every second. Karen's once commanding tone faltered into a shriek. "This is harassment! Jacob set me up!" But as the deputies placed her in handcuffs, the truth was undeniable. Karen wasn't the law. She had been breaking it all along. Jacob stood at his gate. Max, sitting loyally beside him, watching silently as Karen was escorted to the patrol car. His calm gaze met the stares of his neighbors, many of whom gave small nods of support. For the first time since moving here, Jacob felt the weight lifting from his shoulders. Karen struggled, calling out as she was led away. "You'll regret this! All of you! I kept this neighborhood safe!" But her words fell flat against the sound of camera shutters and murmurs of relief. The tyrant had been toppled not by force, but by the truth she thought she controlled. Inside the patrol car, Karen's eyes darted back toward Jacob's ranch, where Max's golden fur glistened in the sun. Her jaw clenched. She thought she was punishing a dog and a man. Instead, she had destroyed herself. The neighborhood was never the same after that morning. Karen's arrest sent shockwaves through every HOA meeting, every porch conversation, every whispered chat at the community park. The woman who had once ruled with intimidation was now reduced to a cautionary tale. For Jacob, though, it wasn't just about Karen's downfall. It was about finally being able to breathe freely on his own land. A week later, he hosted a small barbecue at his ranch. Neighbors who had once avoided him came carrying dishes, folding chairs, and warm smiles. The smell of grilled food and laughter filled the air as children ran through the yard, occasionally stopping to pet Max, who basked in his new role as the neighborhood hero. "Your dog's famous now," one neighbor chuckled, holding out a plate of food. "Half the county's seen the videos. Folks are calling Karen's meltdown the worst HOA story they've ever heard." Jacob smiled, scratching Max's head. "He deserves every bit of the praise. He's the one who stayed calm through all of it." Another neighbor raised a glass. "To Jacob and to Max, for standing up to HOA abuse of power and showing us all what real community means." The group cheered, glasses clinking as Jacob felt something he hadn't since moving in, belonging. Meanwhile, Karen faced the consequences she never thought possible. Court dates, fines, and the loss of her HOA position left her isolated and humiliated. Her allies abandoned her, board members resigned, and the association was forced to restructure under county oversight. The queen of the HOA was dethroned, her kingdom reduced to bitter silence. For Jacob, justice wasn't about revenge. It was about setting things right. He hadn't bought the ranch to fight battles. He'd bought it for peace. And now, as the sun set behind the rolling hills, golden light bathing the neighborhood, he finally had it. He leaned back in his chair, watching Max happily chase a ball thrown by one of the kids. A wave of gratitude washed over him. "We made it, buddy," he murmured. Max barked once, tail wagging as if in agreement, and as night fell, the ranch glowed with laughter, community, and the quiet triumph of a man and his loyal service dog, a story that would echo far beyond the gates of this neighborhood.